Well, good morning. God, first of all, let me just salute our sisters, Movita and Summer. Aren't these remarkable, dynamic sisters representing Pennsylvania? Goodness. Also, as a member of Congress, let me just take a moment to acknowledge some of my colleagues. First of all, I just have to acknowledge Congressman Dwight Evans, who proudly and effectively represents the 3rd Congressional District right here in Pennsylvania. I also want to remind you now that we have 3 phenomenal women from Congress, 4 phenomenal women from right here in Pennsylvania: Madeline Dean and Mary Scanlon, Chrissy Houlihan, and Susan Wild. I have to say this. I had the privilege of speaking at this conference, Netroots Nation, 2 years ago when we were in Atlanta. And there were no women in Congress from Pennsylvania. Look at where we are now. These 4 women are making history, and their voices are being heard loud and clear. Also, let me just acknowledge some of my colleagues who are here with us today, some dynamic, fresh women in Congress whose brilliance and whose boldness and whose bravery gives our caucus really new strength and vision. Ayanna Pressley, who you'll hear from in a minute, and Rashida Tlaib we'll hear in a minute, Ilhan Omar, Deb Haaland, and of course I've got to acknowledge my Oakland sister who is changing the landscape of politics, who's going to moderate the panel, Amy Allison. From Wakanda Forever, my congressional district. We do now have a historic number of progressives in the House of Representatives, including a historic number of women and women of color. And we have a powerful progressive caucus co-chaired by 2 great leaders, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and Congressman Mark Pocan. Now, let me tell you, the last time I addressed Netroots Nation, I talked about a progressive vision for the future that really goes beyond resistance. I spoke about staying woke, which our young people so brilliantly coined. Now, 2 years ago, and let me tell you what I said we have a moral obligation to stay woke, to take a stand and be active, challenging injustices and racism in our communities and fighting hard against hatred and discrimination wherever it rises. Now, someone thought, whoever was listening, that I had an interesting idea about what it meant to stay woke, so much so that they added the definition of woke to the Merriam-Webster dictionary with this quote in there, citing the Netroots comments I gave at Netroots Nation. So now, my brothers and sisters, we are in the dictionary as woke progressive people. So thank you. And so I'm very thankful that I have and we have this platform at Netroots where we can discuss the issues and even the language we use when we consider the issues. Now, as a woman in Congress, I'm very excited to talk about how women have shifted the balance of power by staying woke. And I want to remind you of a quote back in the day, what Dr. King said when he explained that we have no time to waste. He said, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There's no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." And that's what I want to just talk very briefly about this morning. If we're going to win and continue to move forward, every one of us in this room needs to be woke, and we need to be all in. For our part, progressives have been feeling that fierce urgency forever. In just the last 6 months since we took over the House of Representatives, we have passed some huge landmark legislation dealing with health care and workers' wages, and cleaning up corruption in Washington. We are working for the people. The basic notion, though, let me just say, that everyone should have access to a decent quality of life, equality and preservation of our planet really should offend no one. This is not a radical goal. This is central to our democracy and our values. There are plenty of critics out there who will say that the work progressives are doing in the House is pointless and a waste of time because it won't go anywhere in the Mitch McConnell Senate. And there's no question, he's no fan of our work. But let me be clear, we are not just spinning our wheels with these bills. We're showing people who we are, what we want to do, and why our progressive policies are winning with the American people. We're winning. We are holding ourselves accountable, and this is not just rhetoric, it's legislation and policies. And I believe in the power of the people and putting the heat on Mitch McConnell to pass our bills. There are elections coming up, let me remind you. And if that sounds too idealistic, remember this. When we win back the Senate and elect a Democratic president in 2020, whomever she may be, we will have the opportunity to make good on our agenda for the American people. This is the urgency of now. This is staying woke. We must make our agenda known and push it through until we win. So far we passed, let me mention a couple of the bills we passed. The core democratic reforms of H.R. 1, getting money out of politics. We've got to get money out of politics. We passed legislation protecting net neutrality. Universal background checks on guns. Equal pay for women. Veterans protections. And keeping America in the Paris Climate Accord. But there's still so much work that we together have got to do. We're fighting for debt-free college education for all. And yes, a Green New Deal to really save our planet. That's what this will do. And Medicare for all, when finally health care will be a basic human right, as it should have been. And yes, repealing the authorizations for the use of military force, where I was the only one in 2001 to vote no on that. It has been used as a blank check for the president to go to war around the world, including the war which he is stoking with Iran. But let me tell you what happened yesterday. In the defense authorization bill, we passed legislation that said the president cannot use force against Iran unless he comes to Congress. That's what we did yesterday. And we also put into the National Defense Security Bill a repeal of the Iraq authorization to use force. We should have never gone to Iraq in the first place. So we're getting that done. We're getting that done. Progressives have always led on this. There's a whole list of other issues on our plate that shouldn't and wouldn't be issues at all right now, except this administration is working overtime to drag us back to medieval times. But as that old Negro, as they used to call it, spiritual said, ain't nobody gonna turn us around. Nobody's gonna turn us around. Let me tell you a few of the issues we're working on as we push forward. First, beginning with the war on women and our reproductive rights. Reproductive justice has always been one of my top priorities. When I first began my journey on the Hill as a staffer to now as a member of Congress and the co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus. Now, I was a young staffer when Henry Hyde first introduced the Hyde Amendment in '76. That rule blocks federal Medicaid funding for abortion services. Now let's consider that. A federal prohibition on using Medicaid and federal funds for medical service, and yes, abortion is a medical service. Yes. The Hyde Amendment disproportionately prevents black and brown women, immigrants, lower income women from being able to make a personal family decision between a woman and her doctor. That's what it does. Now, Roe versus Wade provided the constitutional right to the full range of reproductive health care, including abortion. Yet millions of women are denied their constitutional rights because of the Hyde Amendment, even though the Supreme Court declared that the right is guaranteed under the Constitution. Now, a couple of years ago, along with two other dynamic progressive women, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Diana DeGette, we led a group of 109 Democrats in introducing the Equal Access to Abortion Coverage and Health Insurance, or the Each Woman Act, that will finally overturn the Hyde Amendment. The Each Woman Act. As recently as 5 years ago, let me tell you, I was told don't talk about Hyde. I was told leave it alone, don't try to repeal it. But I tell you, we were not deterred, and don't you either. Stay persistent. Netroots, we must end the blatant discriminatory Hyde Amendment, and we now have, and I was told we would only pick up a couple of co-sponsors, we have 157 co-sponsors on the bill. 157. But you can help us get to 200 co-sponsors. Ask your congressional representative to sign up as a co-sponsor with the phenomenal women in the All Above All Coalition to get this done. Let's get this done. We can overturn Hyde. Netroots, are you all in? Now here's another place where we can feel the ground shifting. Just last month, for the first time in a decade, Congress held a hearing about reparations for the descendants of slaves in the United States. This bill before Congress, H.R. 40, calls for a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. Now, Netroots, let me be clear. After 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow segregation, state-sanctioned redlining, and continued issues of fair pay, discrimination, lack of educational equity, the Congress and the United States government has an obligation to begin a conversation on reckoning with our brutal past. We're talking about, we've got to do this, because we are talking about a system of government that institutionalized by law racism, and that we're not done with dismantling this yet. Racial justice is a progressive value. It's a progressive value. So it's our moral imperative to look at our history in the eye and make it right. The past is already written, but we must do this now to achieve an equitable future for all. So Netroots, are you all in? Now more than ever, we must commit ourselves to the fight for criminal justice reform. Yes, we've got to do that now. The urgency is now. Women's rights, combating systemic racism, and fighting to ensure that every American is treated equally under the law, no matter their race, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Let me ask you something. Will you help me pass my Marijuana Justice Act? I need your help, because this will expunge all misdemeanor marijuana convictions and establish a restorative justice fund. So help us pass this. H.R. 1456. Get your members of Congress to sign up, because we have got to make right for the laws that unjustly incarcerated so many black and brown individuals. It's time to do this now. Our democracy really is at a defining moment now, and we're all in this together. Our white brothers and sisters must condemn white supremacy, okay? And call out injustice everywhere, everywhere. Whether it denies access to abortion and reproductive care to women of color, seeing inhumane conditions, to children and asylum seekers at the border, or black men murdered at the hands of the police. Women are outraged by the right-wing assault on reproductive rights, but women must be equally enraged by our unjust criminal justice system that has locked up millions and destroyed families and communities. African Americans who stand unapologetically with Black Lives Matter, we must fight to protect immigrant communities from unjust and inhumane assault by ICE and border agents. As a black woman, it's my duty to do this because we know what it's like to be oppressed. I know what it's like to be subjected to government brutality. And all of us must call out the slaughter of black and brown trans women with the same zeal. We've got to do this, regardless of who we are. We've got to do this with the same zeal as we campaign for good jobs and access to education, because we all have a right to live. Okay, we've got to do this because whether it's systemic racism, inequality to access, the ecological devastation of climate change, or environmental racism in our urban communities, whether it's militarism and endless wars, we must stand united. Kimberly Crenshaw, a brilliant black woman and one of the greatest legal scholars. You know Kimberly, great legal scholar of this generation. She said this of our need to stand together in the fight to create a more just and humane society. She said, if we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. So as we walk this path together, I want to offer you just a little advice and a story that has helped me go and keep going, honest to God, in the face of this administration and all its nonsense and all its challenging the three branches of government and moving us toward, unfortunately, what we don't want to see and how we deal with this in Washington. And I want to just start with a couple of things. First, of course, this is a marathon, right? So we must commit to self-care. The burden of pursuing social justice in a climate as partisan and a country as divided as ours, it can be taxing on the soul. So commit yourself to healthy living, meditation, a determination to find something, anything, and I have to do this every day, to be grateful for every single day. Do that. It will renew you and revive you and help you keep going. Commitment to action. Reach out to your members of Congress and your elected officials. Make your voice be heard through calls and op-eds and opposition to destructive policies. Engage in work that protects dreamers in your local community. Engage in that work. Stand with and support members of the Black Lives Matter movement. Do that. Do that. Get politically active and elect progressives to public office. Do something to be part of the solution each and every day. And finally, let's not forget a commitment to history. Everything today seems unprecedented sometimes, but I tell you, don't lose sight of the larger story that we're part of. This year, our nation recognizes the 400th anniversary of the first recorded Africans to English North America. We continue to live with many of those scars today. But I also want to say I stand before you here as the first black woman in leadership of the United States Congress. Okay? Wasn't easy. It was those who came before me that I honor and salute. And so whenever I get too angry, yes I do, about what's going on in Washington, I reflect on a story of a mother and a daughter that has kept me grounded. Many years ago, a woman named Willie burst into a local hospital in El Paso, Texas, seeking urgent health services for her daughter, Mildred. The sweltering heat of the summer had taken its toll on the mother and daughter, and Mildred was languishing in uncontrollable pain. She was pregnant and in desperate need of a cesarean section. Now, Willie and her daughter Mildred were African Americans. So sadly, the hospital would not admit Mildred because she was black, and this was in the South. Willie spent hours trying to convince the admissions office that she was Irish because she was very fair-skinned. An Irishman had raped her grandmother. So her grandfather was Irish. So by telling this true story, Mildred was admitted into the hospital to deliver her baby. But then when she was left on a gurney in the hall unattended once they admitted her, as she waited for treatment, time dragged on. Mildred's health and the health of her unborn child hung in the balance. Now, by the time the doctors in the hospital made their rounds, they had discovered that Mildred was forced to have a last-minute forceps delivery. She and her baby almost died. As the doctors struggled to bring Mildred's baby into the world, pulling her out with forceps, the force scraped the eyelid, forever leaving a tear right above her right eye. Or I should say, my right eye, because that little baby girl was me. Okay, that was me. So most of that scar is gone now. But every now and then, when the future looks bleak, and the hard work of our progressive movement becomes overwhelming, I reach above my eye for a reminder that the forces of hatred and bigotry can be overcome. And that's what gives me the motivation to fight on. That's what reassures me that no matter how dark the day, that we can prevail if we stand together and refuse to be satisfied with the status quo. We must disrupt the status quo and stand in the gap so we can move this country forward. And so that's why I'm proud to be with you all today, because together we are going to win a progressive future. No matter who you are or where you're from, you belong in this movement. We have much work to do, and we can do it if you're committed to knocking on doors, talking to your friends. Yeah, we got to get more politically active and volunteering for progressive candidates. If we stand together, yeah, we can keep the House of Representatives and we can flip the Senate. We can do that. And we can take back the White House. We can do that. So are you all in? Are you all woke? Okay, Netroots Nation, let's leave here and go out and change this country. And thank you again.